There's more than one way to get 3D representation, 3D georeference representation in Google Earth, and we've seen a few of them. One of the easiest ways is to simply open up Google Earth and turn on the 3D buildings layer. Now, this information exists like a website. As soon as you zoom in on a certain area in Google Earth, if the 3D models exist and they've been accepted by Google, they will render. So here's downtown Fargo. There's actually some pretty good buildings, pretty good modeling, geo modeling that's been happening down here. I was pretty impressed with what I found. Another way is to turn on the terrain, because of course terrain is three-dimensional and it's usually a little bit more apparent than what you can see here. But one thing you can do, if you're in an area that's a little topographically challenged, such as Fargo, under the preferences, which is on the Mac underneath Google Earth, and preferences on Windows, you will want to go to Tools and Options. But once in here, there's an option to set your an exaggeration right here. So underneath 3D view, elevation exaggeration, you can go up to 3. So there we go. Makes Fargo look a little bit more exciting. Now, if models are georeferenced correctly, they are set to be attached to the ground elevation, not to some arbitrary amount. So when you turn on elevation, you should see the buildings stick to that. But one thing I noticed here, I'm going to turn off terrain, which makes Google Earth just this completely flat ecosystem here. Notice most of these buildings still stick to the ground. But I saw one, there it is, just kind of floating up in space. So whoever modeled that did it incorrectly, and that's just a setting when you create these models that you'll want to be aware of. So floating something. I think it's Concordia dorms, or maybe Minnesota. So let's go ahead and look at a couple of other ways to get three-dimensional representation in Google Earth. And one of the ways that we looked at already, and I'll go ahead and turn off 3D buildings here, is just to use the built-in polygon feature. So we can create place marks, polygons, or paths, or image overlays. If you do the add polygon, and I'll go ahead and drag this off to the side, and I'll go ahead and just quickly do an outline around this building. And I'm just clicking once for each point. I'll drag that one up a little bit. You can kind of massage it. It's not really accurate. This is a very kind of old school, quick and dirty way to do this, but it works for certain purposes. For the style and color, I'll go ahead and set this to orange and hit OK. Put my opacity down to 50. And if you accidentally hit OK, like that, the dialog goes away. Your shape is still there. Just remember, if you want to go back and edit it, you just need to find it where it's at. It'll either be under temporary places or maybe under my places if your cursor happened to be up there. But I'll go ahead and right click and select Get Info. On Windows, that will say Properties, I think. Whatever the bottom one is, that's what you want. So now we can edit this polygon once again. And what I want to do is change the altitude, and I'll set this relative to ground. So here's an important differentiation between geo modeling. For example, that floating building was probably set to reference to sea floor. So regardless of what the topography, if it was turned on or off, it was relative to the sea floor, which does not change typically. I'll say relative to ground. And as I drag the elevation here, you can see it changing. You could type it in manually if you'd like. But very important, I'm going to say extend sides to ground. And, depending on what this represents, the height can really be anything. I'll go ahead and just set it to look like that. I'm going to go back and change a style and color setting. Now that I've given this some height, I don't want those edges to show up, or at least not as much. So I could either set the opacity down to say 20, and notice they're much lighter, or 0 or whatever you want. I'll keep it so you can kind of see them. And notice you can still change these shapes by clicking and dragging. Again, very basic shape, but depending on the purpose, it might be kind of nice, for certain callouts, depending on if you're trying to highlight a certain area, especially in the context of the other 3D buildings that have already been modeled or other ones that you've added. So, there's a time and a place for modeling three-dimensional shapes in this way. And once that is created, once you have anything in Google Earth, with the exception of this stuff, you can't save the stuff that exists on the Google servers. You can't save that in your My Places. That's always just on or off. But things that you create or import, such as the shape, once it exists under your places, you can right-click and do Save Place As. And a dialog should pop up here with either a KML or a KMZ extension. And then once that is saved, you can email it to someone, you can upload it to the 3D warehouse, you can load it up in different geo modeling applications. So let's take a quick look at another way. One very obvious way to geomodel is with Sketchup, but another one is with an online tool called Builtin Maker. And what I'd recommend, if you're interested in this, is just Google Sketchup Builtin Maker and see what comes up. So I'll go ahead and hit this. Click Try Builtin Maker. And it's completely web-based, so you don't use Google Earth, you don't use SketchUp. And if you want to give it a try, I'd recommend get this far and just click on this link, this Builtin Maker tutorial, and you'll learn all about that. But I'm going to go ahead and turn off that shape that I just made, and I'm going to go to SketchUp. So once you are in SketchUp, there's this tool called Add Location, and it may be on your toolbar, your top toolbar, depending on how you have it configured. If not, you can find it underneath the Google Tool Palette. So just go to View, Tool Palettes, click on Google. You'll have a set here, and we should see it right there. It's grayed out. I hope it still works. Let's see what happens. Oh, interesting. So when you click on that, nothing happens. You might need to either load it up here, or let's see where that lives. Ah, there it is. So the other way is to go to File, Geolocation, and click on Add Location. This will take you to a browser. Let me go ahead and resize that. And just like Google Maps, this is all built on the Google GeoWeb infrastructure. So Google Earth, Google Maps, it all kind of looks at the same imagery. But I'll go ahead and search for Fargo, North Dakota, and it zooms us in pretty close to downtown. And I am going to look at this area right here. This is the US Bank Plaza in downtown Fargo. So I'll just get it kind of close. Once you get close, you can click on Select Region right up here. And I'll go ahead and make that smaller. Once you get somewhat close, go ahead and hit Grab. So now, by the act of doing that, our SketchUp model is by its nature georeferenced. Anything we model in here has a georeference point. It's very important that it is only a georeference point. This tool only really works for block level, maybe a few blocks, but if you get anything over a quarter mile or a half a mile, the curvature of the earth actually comes into play and things will not be accurate. So just keep in mind, this is really only good for certain areas. It's got its constraints. If I tried to model a building that just happened to be like way over here, I'll click on that and model that, it will not be completely accurate because the center of this model, that's the pinpoint. That's where it decided to place this. And you know what? I'm going to delete that. Let's give this a shot. I'll go ahead and add another location. Now, that first point that I imported, that is the actual geolocation point. Everything else, it's relative to that point, but it's not projected. And remember, the whole projection thing is very, very important because that's how the map gets peeled off of a real world globe and then reattached later on. So let's go ahead and try to model my house, which is right here. I'll hit grab. That gets added. Oh, and here we go. It's essentially telling everything I just said. If it's so far away, it might not be displayed correctly, but I'll go ahead and add it anyway. So here's my first import, and here's my other one over here. Now, if SketchUp is the end game, if we're only modeling this in SketchUp and that's all we care to do, this is fine. But if you want it to be more flexible, it might not work very well. So let's go ahead and go to a top view here, and I'll quickly and somewhat carefully try to hit the precise corners of my house. And somewhere behind that tree. And I think my eave is somewhere right around there. All right, so that's not at all accurate, but the corners are good. That's all that matters. Now I'm going to go ahead and send this back to Google Earth, clicking this button here. The preview model in Google Earth. And if you don't have that toolbar, it lives, I believe, under that same tool we were at before, file, not geolocation. It's just above that preview in Google Earth. Now this loads it up under your temporary places, right over here. And if you want to save it, remember you just got to drag it up to my places. Let's see, where did it put this? Somewhere where I can't see it. Is that it, way over there? Let's try to zoom in. Oh, there it is. All right, so you can see, yeah, even there, look how much it's off. I mean, it's probably only off by 10 feet, but the point is, it is not accurate. So keep it somewhat close if you want to use this method. Let's go ahead and delete that. Go back to SketchUp, and you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and start this over. So I'll create a model, hit add location. Let's go back to downtown Fargo. And I'm just repeating the same steps I did at first. I'm looking at this, the US Bank Plaza, hit grab, and it's loaded into SketchUp. So geo modeling. You can geo model with your own photos. You can also geo model completely using what's available with SketchUp. For example, I'm going to look at the Radisson, just this part right here. And I'll go ahead and kind of roughly draw that in. You know, it's probably about, I'm going to push-pull that up 18 feet. I'm just trying to think about how high that is off the ground. You know, it's probably more like 20 feet. So I'll add a couple feet. And I will erase that stuff. Push-pull it some more. It's, I think, 2 stories. You know what? I'll just go ahead and eye it. And, you know, let's just pull that back. That's kind of roughly the shape we're looking for. So, for example, if we wanted to texture one of these, geotexture. If you have your own photo, you can apply it and stretch it out. But this is kind of a neat feature. You can right-click and select Add Photo Texture. Now this loads up that same Geo Web Services. It loads up the Street View. And we can see here it's actually a pretty old Street View because the parking ramp is still there. But there we go. That's that wall that I'm looking at right there. And I might need to back up a little bit. All right, so I want to apply that texture. I'll go ahead and click on Select Region and just drag these corners as precise as I can. to the corners of the actual texture that I want to apply. So we're really somewhat at the mercy of how good the street photo is. You know, you can geomodel by kind of mixing and matching. You could do some of this, you could take your own photos. We'll probably do something more with that later on, but for now, I'll go ahead and hit grab, and you can see that it has applied that now directly to that surface. So a lot of the models in Google Earth that are geo-modeled and georeferenced are created this way. But another way that I like to use Google Earth with SketchUp and geomodeling is really more at a conceptual level. So, you know, just very conceptual graphics that really mean something not quite as literal as it is, like pathways and intersections and the typical observation and analysis graphics. And, you know, one thing I like to do before I jump right into it is to create somewhat of a virtual tracing layer. Let's go ahead and get rid of that piece that I created. And I'm going to draw just a rectangle. And I'll go ahead and select that. I'll grab the move tool and I'll move this just up, making sure I'm in the blue direction. And then I'll apply a texture, like a yellow with some transparency on it. So also very important, I will put on parallel projection and set my view to be straight down, top down. And that, I've got all these set to shortcuts, but that's underneath camera, standard views, and top. So there we go. You know, really quickly, let's go ahead and just draw some shapes. And I'm going to offset that. Move that a little bit. I don't like that. Let's select both those. Just to give it a little bit more of a dynamic look here. Now I'm using the pencil tool to just kind of rough in some arrowheads here. Now what's kind of nice is because I've drawn that, that tracing paper, if I'm being careful here, I should be snapping to this. And if I just pause for a moment here, you can see that it says on face or perpendicular to edge. On face, there we go. On face is a safe bet that you are actually drawing on this face. Now, if you're being kind of careless, which I bet you I was over here. Oh no, I guess it worked. You may sometimes draw in the blue direction above where you really are intending. But as long as you're all on the same plane, you should be able to come back here and just erase those extra lines. So did I select? Oh, I did something wrong here. Let's see if we can't. There we go. So now I've got just that shape. I can go ahead and push pull it. I'm going to group this and rotate it just a little bit, just for, maybe it looks something like this and actually means something. We can still do our same shapes. So that same polygon thing we did, if I wanted to do that in SketchUp, I would just extrude a shape like that. So it's a little bit easier. And then apply, a color with a transparency. When you open up the color dialog, either by clicking on the paint bucket tool or hitting the shortcut, that'll load that right up. And there should be a slider here to set a transparency on that. Now, another nice thing is just using the text tool. So you got this three-dimensional text tool that you can use over here. And if I just type asterisk and set the size to be something large, like I'm going to make this 20 feet. And I'll even extrude it 10 feet and hit place. That's still actually quite small, but once it's in here, you can scale it and kind of make it your own thing. So maybe this means something. Intersection, and we got another intersection. Oops, I was not being careful there. And another intersection, and this one's not as important, so I'm going to make it smaller. And let's add some colors and transparencies, because transparencies just kind of look nice. So it ends up being a very kind of Mario World type effect here, but you know, it's got its purposes, and for just representational things, it works pretty well. Let's go ahead and change that. All right, so once you've got something modeled, you know, the whole point here is that it's georeferenced information that can be repurposed in anything that honors its georeferencing, which, you know, SketchUp and Google Earth do. So just like I did before, I'll go ahead and click on the preview model in Google Earth. And you know, it's important to note that lines do not transfer over in Google Earth, just the surfaces. But here we've got a very representational, kind of neat effect that we can use in the context of the whole wealth of stuff that you can view in Google Earth, whether it's geo models or image overlays. You know, we can turn it on and off. We can add it as a part of a tour or an animation. All kinds of things you can do with it. So give some of those different modeling ways a try. And as always, let me know if you have any questions.